Thank you for that brief introduction. Today we have two very important writers from Ireland. Miss Amanda Bell, who writes poems and who have tried writing haikus, and even she's a novelist and a children's literature writer. And Gabriel Rosenstock, he has written quite a number of poems, nearly 160 books in his credit, and he is a translator as well. And he is very much interested in Indian culture and Indian tradition. So, a very good day. So, this is basically a reading session, and then initially Gabriel's poems were translated by Amanda Bell, and this is basically initially we will start with that reading session, and Gabriel will read the Irish version of the poems, and Rosenstock will read the Irish version, and Miss Amanda Bell will read the English version because she has translated one of his books, and it is called Sasquatch. Yeah. So I invite both of you to read the poems.
Good morning. It was the Portuguese laureate José Saramago who once said, "Writers create national literature, translators create world literature." I've been fortunate with many of my translators, the late Michael Hartnett and Paddy Bush, who is here today and will be reading on today's program. And the poems we're going to start with come from a volume called Sasquatch that Amanda has translated into English. Now, a translator should try to maybe equal the original or improve upon it if possible. And one remarkable improvement that Amanda made on the original manuscript is that she changed the gender of the Sasquatch from male to female. So the Sasquatch is like the North American equivalent of the Yeti, if you like, a mythical beast. What it stands for in this book-length sequence of poems, I'll leave that to you, and to think in terms of the world's biodiversity, linguistic diversity, all these things being threatened in the world we live in today. So this book, Sasquatch, actually starts with the end of the Sasquatch. She dies, she drowns, and the rest of the poems that follow are, if you like, the backstory, glimpses of her life just before her end. Bach Sasquatch a réir, ní a bhéine dá bhaintear beo, éine an áchar a chuoineacha.
Last night, a Sasquatch drowned. None of her kind remain to mourn her.
Féchan an Sasquatch héin san isce, nílas aige catán, ná céhé féin, ní réach sé riamh héin mar ní le heilig.
Looking at herself in the water, she doesn't know what she sees or who she is. She's never seen herself before as anything as such, the Sasquatch.
Een ette. Fekken an Sasquatch. Een ette. Nu de imensje as raak. Lauren rodegen aan heen. En mooi tusselesh. Konnes. Kahin. Ken fa. Ni holdo.
Watching a bird in flight. In its wake, the Sasquatch knows she too will disappear. Just not how, or when, or why.
Dahana na spearha. Nur a lerian, dahana down, dahana na spearha. Tenan Sasquatcher fawn, gan down a reine, do ikke.
When the colors of earth and sky are as one, she is invisible, free to roam.
Nur dichtje in de jogestag. Gnikken Sasquatch. Nach in a hie gahir. A gasse in aardige. Nog dan a levige. Gal. Het achter mag as a wiel. Gline, volle, teuvelish.
Through the window, she sees a seated thing, its feet up, newspaper in hand, breathing smoke, a glass of blood by its side.
Kuig sheard slatvoig. Bolien an Sasquatche. Nurivin rodegen a volusum.
Is it working? From half a mile away, the Sasquatch can smell someone pick up her scent.
Tra kush coaster. Tairich den Sasquatch. Grev nach aimshehege an te lena moanochshe a chine rushikse. Ni revuntach karigacha sanarige skeri lomme.
By the sea, she dreams of a companion, a father for her children. Awakes to bare rocks, a barren reef.
Blahane, nueristische, blad en sjedoer. Hastigon Sasquatch, hare niele hot woig, ach, kede.
The first flower she plucked, she held out like a gift. But for whom?
Mine na gloch. Nur a lagen Sasquatch soelere, na cloche, mine sin geleid, boenelesh kon as a harleshe, gwe, muir, scrad, shremmenach na wilaan. Liheden sha shelish heen, bed nos na gloch.
Stones on the shore, smoothed by wind and tide, honed by gull cries. I too will lie here, she decides, become as they are.
Paint oer. Lien en Sasquatch er griem, is liggenden law, a eggen feintal. Ni vin een da la marchele.
Reclining, the Sasquatch lets each day repaint her mind. No 2 days are the same.
Realty. gan é ní á hagusc ach a bhíonta chu sé ólas ar na réaltaí, lean sé iad, lean siad san eisian.
Nothing but her own desires taught her how to read the stars. She followed them, they followed her.
Tá clúasa ar na cuilte, ar na mónéir, súile, sróna, uiranta bín breis a hóhanda ag an Sasquatch.
Overwhelmed. Everywhere she goes, the fields and woods see and smell and hear her.
Lean an Sasquatch scamal feg trí lá lense é, lean tríd an ihe, gannisige cadúrfi é, a gaharú lá, bách an scamal, scamal eile, díl sér a chascéim é suite gama.
Curious, she trails a cloud for 3 days and 3 nights. When it merges with a cloud bank, she retraces her steps, perplexed.
Bláhanna a ríis inniuh, dósa sesin leis éin, cé bhuaig, sléite na dust.
More flowers for me? But from whom? From whom? No answer from the silent mountain.
Nuair a ghlainn na beanabána, gélan an Sasquatch dóibh, si uair na báinne í, is na mar chaisí, is mihid fiachant an áirde, is fiachant siar.
In winter, the snowy peaks beckon. She turns to whiteness, waterfalls, reflection.
Rána, má héan conir dheis, slé, casan an Sasquatch eis, ní hól dó ach conir a bháin.
Faced with a choice of paths, she turns back. For the Sasquatch, there is only one way.
Daimsigh sé cúracht a bháthar úr, is solas lachtach na gealaí sa táille.
Moonlight on the sea. In the milky light, the scent of her mother.
Fuil chúna, viad ar breis uirich lig a heilig, ach besach dósan áitina nar tairiach riamhdóibh, fis a daire vige.
Pursued by wolves, she knows places beyond their dreams, knows their dreams as seeds.
Gilach yerkach, cé tá hithe, cé tá hithe, cé tá I githe na gealaí.
The shrinking moon, who is eating it bite by bite?
Áit éigen a mohan son sa bhóin slé, á héamh ag an ngrian a líon a heir chum marmh le hart fin drása.
In a mountain pasture somewhere, sun-warmed, her father lies, stone dead by this time.
Madin voch is tas on rain, hehen Sasquatch, stach se chuil, luter eter al anuint, has creen go grod in a line a chosint.
At dawn, the Sasquatch melts into the woods, pursued by roars. Trees muster to protect her.
Fragri, Kadachrohian, Tornach, Krub a couple, Teentrach, a good soul.
Tell me what thunders. Horses' hooves. Their eyes make lightning.
Rahinach, Oirinte son she spága srahan glé, an rahinach as scrúdúige, is na tachtarach díomhe, luascach, a gaidi ciún, ní mór a bheith ardalach.
Bathing her feet in the clear stream, she watches the semaphore of ferns, always on the qui-vive.
Fwac. Húsig sé, diachan a himpel, niac a fwac, ach daun a dolas, fehef fad a vorige gur nocht an daun a uir as an mreid.
Early morning, and the world is as nothing. As she waits, it recreates itself from wisps.
Tart. Dimig na hen geleer hannig banna spiaconacha chan ol as an loch dan an Sasquatch lena oon.
Birds desert jagged peaks to drink from the lake. She waits to slake her thirst.
Lamonahe. Hannig Lamonahe is dimig. Ní láire vegan Sasquatch na creen ar a se mórleo. Níl na cuilte mar a chéle in an émus. Dála spekish hain. Creen a géag ar fud na crinne.
Loggers came and went. The Sasquatch lost count of the trees she used to know. Now the woods aren't the same. Her own kind, trees, disappearing all around the globe.
Cuasan. Gaun an gilach stach a guasan a agine sator a rodegan is gan tachter.
The moon explores the caverns of her mind, searching, searching.
Gilcach, tenan Sasquatch, a spogol sa Gilcach, and down Haravecune, ni chlashin shefwek, ach a chri, a muliu, snassi an oil, an loch o vroch go broch.
Among reeds, the wading Sasquatch in the silent world, the only sound, her slowing pulse. The lake's still surface, polished by her breath.
Sasquatch imas grealty, an made a dead an Sasquatch. Lesh na realty is it shoed a rash. Leshen a gogger, fanach sheatere, roon nach ol de nachabe, shachas, na lamproge, kampanig, an chron traha.
Who knows the whisperings of the Sasquatch and the stars? Only their dusk companions, fireflies.
Lá eile drapadóireachta batha, elú an down, na crílte drapa, scamuil, fada rairc wig beléirdo, mérini an fúca, a drapa de hir.
Another day of climbing away from the world. Woods climbing into cloud, foxgloves climbing out of sight.
Báusíne, feig mander, bacachas dó, go ma jaule súili, an áirse, súil a bhí a fiechantar, is trínar léir dó, an fear raun.
The rainbow's arc appeared like an eye through which she glimpsed, for an instant, the world as it really is.
Géana a getalt ó huig, catá go rá, cho práinach sin, déan ru, catá go á lorug, will flahas waha, la stauld and downsa, no nauli gahana de red for the a nation is bree, lena more August.
What are they saying, the northbound geese, in one loud voice? Do they seek another realm? Have they found it? Is this what they proclaim?
I think maybe we'll finish the haiku sequence with this poem, Bring Load. An Bring Load, atá sa tail, a Irian and Sasquatch de Hain, an Bring Load e Sugarlaid, a Willem im Húshacht, Keita, Kata e Corniceste, im Lán Dóishacht, Glen, Quilach Freig.
Do I dream all this? The Sasquatch wonders. Do I dream the world? Am I awake? Who or what is it that wonders? Truly awake? A moorcock calls.
Thank you, both of you. That was a great reading, I would say, because this is the first time I am listening to Irish language, and I almost felt that it's like a chant, and it was of course a great feel, and you have done a wonderful job. And also, I would like to ask Aminta Bell, and what was the experience of translating his poems, and also like you have done a gendered shuffle over there because you have changed the gender of Sasquatch. So I'd like to know more about the translation experience and the politics behind changing the gender.
I was delighted to have the opportunity to translate this because I've admired Gabriel's work for a long time, and this particular work resonated very strongly with a lot of my own themes in my own writing, and so I gave a bit of time to think what translation actually meant and to what extent are you creating something of your own. It was, I suppose, complicated by the fact that in Gabriel's book, The Sasquatch, his own translations appear in English. So I had his English. My Irish isn't great, so I was relying on a dictionary for the Irish, looking at his English, conscious of not wanting to completely write the same thing as he had in his own translations, but also not deliberately moving away from that just for the sake of it, because sometimes I think the way he had translated his own words was the perfect way of doing it. So there was no point deliberately not using the same turn of phrase, for example. And the change of gender, I thought I think the poem has quite a sort of an existential exploration of the self, and therefore, to me, as a writer and a translator, it made sense to change the gender. And I think it does give a different flavour to the text, definitely.
And I would like to ask a question. Actually, the 20th century Irish literature was rich with so many great writers, I would say, James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, Gino Cassay, and so many great writers, W.B. Yeats and Patrick Kavanagh. So, how do contemporary Irish writers take their legacy and bring forward their legacy too, and in their contemporary writing, in their writing? Because earlier you had so many great writers, and how you continue with that legacy?
Well, you must realize that Irish is an ancient language. It belongs to the Celtic group of families. English, on the other hand, derives originally from Anglo-Saxon, is a Germanic language related to Dutch, German, Scots. It is a different experience of the world, a different prism through which to see the world and experience the world. It is at least 1,000 years older than English. So when you talk about Joyce, Yeats, or go back to, let's say, to Swift, Goldsmith, Sheridan, and so on through the centuries, you're talking essentially about an Anglo-Irish tradition, literature that's written in English. Now, Irish language literature had a golden age before the first croakings of English were heard in the Thames Valley, shall we say. So it's also, Irish is also, and of course, as most languages in Europe are, part of the Indo-European family. Most of the ancient Irish literature, or epics and so on, was written down by monks when Ireland became Christianized in the 5th, 6th century. So, to have an insight into Irish language literature, and there's a literature in Old Irish, Middle Irish, and Modern Irish, to have an insight into that literature is to have an insight into a mind that is actually pre-Christian. And you don't find many literary examples in European literature that give us that insight, in fact. The two languages are separate in many respects, but naturally they have interchanged and have had a relationship with each other and borrowings from each other. I worked in a state publishing house for most of my working life, and that particular publishing house produced a number of English language novels and short stories, and in Irish language translation, and these were considered to be, if you like, models for a new generation of Irish language writers which didn't have the novel or the short story as part of their literary heritage, I should say. So I think that the two languages and the two literatures are learning from each other, at least those who are curious enough or have the ability to learn from one another. There are also writers, I would say, in both languages, in Irish and in English, who are completely isolated from the experience of those writing in the other language. So, at times you have, if you like, a very generous and a very creative and productive embracing by one culture of the other, yeah? But at other times you become very surprised at almost a type of cultural or linguistic apartheid that exists. So you could pick up an anthology of maybe, let's say, the best Irish short stories, and you would expect that the two languages would be represented. Sometimes it is not the case. Sometimes Irish language short stories are completely excluded in translation from such anthologies. So it's the luck of the draw. You don't know from one year to the next who is going to understand that we have two literatures and that they should be on equal footing. And let me tell you that even today there are some media outlets who will have nothing at all whatsoever to do with the Irish language. They would not review books in Irish. So this is an editorial policy that this particular, let's say, Sunday newspaper has made. And you could be knocking on that door forever. That door is not going to open for Irish language writers. So there is a frisson or a tension there, but tensions can also be creative.
Yeah, I think when you ask the how you carry on with the influence of the Irish writers, Anglo-Irish writers possibly, who are internationally renowned, I think that gives a huge burden in some ways to young Irish writers. And I know a huge number of people who would have studied English literature at university level because they aspired to be creative writers and basically gave up for 10 or 15 or 20 years because of that sort of burden of responsibility, and that it's perhaps more creatively productive to look elsewhere, to look to America or Japan or anywhere internationally and sort of approach writing in Ireland from a tabula rasa, so you don't feel that influence.
And you were talking about media, how media respond to this revival of the language. So I just wonder, I know that Irish government is so keen in this idea of revival of Irish language. But I wonder, what is the take of the people, the readers, the common readers towards this Irish revival in Ireland?
My experience of the government's handling of the so-called revival of the Irish language goes a bit like this. Every so often they produce a plan, an action plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, yeah? And you know what? On paper, it looks very, very good, very, very promising. And then some fool of a bureaucrat or a civil servant gets his hands on it. And what happens really is that these plans go awry, like the best made plans of mice and men. They just go awry. They're not properly monitored, and they're executed in a half-hearted way, or they're forgotten. And one of the reasons is that we never, as a people, got to grips with the notion of language planning as a science in itself. Now, there are places in Canada, in Israel, of course, where language revival is taken very seriously, and for instance, in Wales, you would have found certain Welsh-speaking villages And part of the language planning of that region was simply not to allow the colonization of these areas by English speakers, because it would lead to eventually a bilingual or diglossial society, and finally English would take over as the dominant language. Yeah? I know some Welsh militant language activists who actually took the law into their own hands, and when holiday makers from England bought cottages there, they actually burned them to the ground. Now, this was extreme language activism, but it made the point that there are rules of preserving linguistic integrity in certain areas. Now, Irish-speaking areas in Ireland are called Gaeltachtaí. A Gaeltacht is an Irish-speaking area. These have not been properly protected. Emigration has been rife in these areas throughout the centuries, and in the 20th century, from the 30s on, many monoglot speakers, that is to say people who could only speak Irish, had to get on the boat and go to London and look for a job. Some of them even had to put a sign around their necks, put me on a train to Liverpool, please, or put me on the train to London. They hadn't sufficient English to communicate, right? Then they'd arrive in London and they might see a sign on the window, no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. So I'm painting a bit of a dramatic picture here, but I don't think our government seriously looked after those people, their cultural needs or their physical needs. There are large parts of the Gaeltacht today that are simply dying. As I said, the language planning was a farce. It was never scientifically or methodically thought out or executed. I'm sad to say. There are some success stories. After much pressure on the government, language activists finally got their own radio station, and then later on their own television station. There is also quite a rise in the amount of what are called Gaelscoileanna or Irish medium schools. And this is very hopeful because at least this guarantees a degree of fluency among pupils, which unfortunately the non-Gaelscoileanna, your ordinary, everyday English-speaking school, they might be teaching Irish for 10, 12 years in these schools without achieving fluency in their pupils. You see, a lot of pupils see Irish as of no practical use to them, and apply themselves better to maybe science subjects or even in a foreign language, French, German, Chinese.
Yeah, in fact, in one of your interviews I read online, you said your children were able to read Irish now. They can hear the songs, and of course it is I consider it as a political movement. But I would like to know the position of Irish Republican Army today, because I heard that in the history of Irish Revolution, of course, they play a wonderful role, and still in newspapers we see their association with PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. So I just wonder what is their legacy and its continuity.
Well, the IRA has officially been disbanded, so it doesn't really exist anymore. Unless you're talking about a small band called the Continuity IRA, they're still around. I think it's fair to say that people, your average citizen of Ireland, there are two ways of looking at people, at groups such as the IRA. One is as freedom fighters, the other is as terrorists. It appears to me that most people in Ireland today would view them as terrorists. Now, one of the reasons that the IRA will be seen as terrorists by most people in Ireland is that the whole brunt of the media is anti-Republican. Yeah, the media and indeed the government, and we're now at a very delicate time with Brexit negotiations happening. The government and the media see, and quite realistically in many respects, see our neighbour England as our main economic partner. And you know, that's where a lot of our exports go, our dairy products, and so on. So the IRA would be seen as continuing a war that most people think is over. Yeah? So they're seen as an irrelevancy now, and their political wing, Sinn Féin, is now part of the democratic process of finding seats in Parliament, though they don't take seats in Westminster from their Northern Ireland constituency, because that would mean an oath to the Queen, and that would be one step too far for them, I imagine.
Well, just that I suppose that we have moved into more of a political process, and that the cessation of violence over the last 20 years has been obviously, I would think, an entirely positive thing for the country.
I have read one of your poems being dedicated to Savita Halapanova. And because she died, as we all know, she died during an abortion. And no, she was refused an abortion. And yeah, can you tell me about that poem and the way you want to, what do you want to convey through that poem? And can you say something about that particular poem?
Yeah, Savita died. She was a young married woman, in the first trimester of pregnancy with a wanted child, began to miscarry. Normally, you should have been able to have a D&C, and she was refused that on what was probably more medical negligence grounds than ethical grounds, but it was taken up as being an ethical move, which very much fed into the campaign for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, which was brought in 1983, which gave equal rights to the life of a fetus in utero as to the mother, which has been an enormously controversial piece of legislation, which is due to be put to a referendum probably this May. And shall I read the poem, actually? It's very short. This is Dark Days, in memory of Savita Halapanova. Suspended at the end of Krishna Paksha, the moon is a sickle, freeze-framed in the night sky. The fireworks have been cancelled, replaced by candles and a vision of you dancing on the cusp. these are dark days between Diwali and Advent, waiting for the moon to wax. So I mentioned in that a vision of you dancing on the cusp, and there's a wonderful photograph of her. She's a very beautiful woman. I think the photograph, if I remember correctly, was at the Diwali celebrations. There were lots of lights in the background. It has become quite an iconic photograph, and that, for me, is the image behind this, and the idea that her death has marked an enormous turning point in Irish society, so that the idea of being on the cusp between sort of waves of social movements. So that was the thinking behind the poem.
Yeah, I was thinking about that Diwali image in that poem when I read it. And I was surprised to see there are quite a number of Indian images in your poem and yours too, a few. But yeah, I hope that it is deliberate. And can you elaborate on your connection with Indianness and, of course, spirituality? And because in one of your interviews, I read that you read about your connection with Ramana Maharshi. So, Ramana Maharshi. Yeah. So, can you talk about that? About Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi. The Tiruvannamalai. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I have a curious relationship with India, a curious fascination with all the saints, yogis, godmen, true and false, of India. And I'd like to read a translation of a poem here. In English it's called Meher Baba Kisses the Feet of Lepers. Now, Meher Baba is just one of many, many figures that I find completely fascinating. Historically, an interesting footnote is that he was on the same ship that brought Gandhi to Britain that time. But I watched a video of Meher Baba washing the feet of lepers around the time that Ireland was going through a deep economic recession. That's the recent one, 2008. And, you know, we were calling our bankers, we were calling them banksters, you know. But around the same time as well, I saw an anthology, The Course of Irish Poetry since Swift. Well, as we said earlier on, you know, Irish poetry didn't begin with Swift. So this poem combines a few of these elements, what I was thinking and feeling at the time. Dust of the roads on misshapen feet, kissed over and over again by Meher Baba, embracing their beautiful souls, God's fragrance spreading far and near, sweeter than jasmine. The one reality that is the tree, he, the sap, roots, branches pointing everywhere, sun and wind dancing among leaves, shimmering lepers resting in the shade. Come to us, come to Dublin, Belfast, Cork, Galway, kiss the feet of lepers, bankers, politicians, lawyers, poets who cannot go further back than Swift. So, for me, India is also a way of introducing and combining different motifs, different themes. And if we consider the brain to have two sides, the Indian and the Irish side are the two sides of my brain at this stage, if one can say that.
And I can see a kind of meditative practice in your poems. So I can find a vague connection between that meditative practice and your haiku forms, the concept of silence in haiku forms. And day before yesterday, in a conversation with Dr. K. Sachidanandan, you were talking about Basho and Japanese master of haiku Basho, and Irish tradition of writing haiku. Do you deliberately try to bring up that form, or what is the intention behind you writing a haiku? Has it something to do with any kind of political revival of the language, or what is the idea behind you writing a haiku? How you found haiku as one of your major medium of expressing? Both of you.
I started writing haiku relatively recently, certainly compared to Gabriel. But it was more from either what you could define as a mental health perspective or a spiritual perspective, just a way of containing experience or narrowing down focus, I think.
And also Haibun too.
Haibun form, for me, I came across it again relatively recently and realized that it was something I'd been writing for a long time, just for my own purposes, and it was the most wonderful experience to discover that this was actually a genre, and that therefore there were journals that I could submit my work to, because I'd been doing it all along. So it's a wonderful sense of recognition, and it's just a form that works particularly well for me. And I think the combination of prose and poetry offers opportunities. I mean, prose poetry is a very broad church and would be quite hard to define, but I think there's a large debate about what constitutes a haibun, what type of prose is appropriate. It was initially one of the early theorists, Ken Jones, said that it should be like finding pearls in a mud bank, that the prose is the very sort of flat prose, and then the haiku is the little shining gem. But I think it has evolved so as the prose would be characterized by haiku-like qualities of clarity of expression particularly, and there's a very broad range within that. It's used from everything from diarizing to travel writing to even science fiction now. Gabriel mentioned the use of the two sides of the brain, Indian and Irish, and I think there's a neurophysicist called Ian McGilchrist who's written recently a book called The Divided Brain. Now it's an entire theory about how the Western world is using the more narrow focus of the brain, and what we should be using is the broader focus. But the suggestion would be that one half of your brain does a broad focus and the other half narrows down, and I think that's what haibun actually does. It does a zoom and pan, sort of a cinematic effect, and therefore it exercises both parts of your brain, reaches parts that other poetry can't reach. Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm asked, but what has haiku got to do with the Irish tradition, I refer people to a book that you can get online called Ancient Irish Poetry by a German Celtic scholar called Kuno Meyer. And when Meyer was examining early Irish nature lyrics, he said, I can't find anything in world literature to compare with these nature lyrics outside of the literature of Japan. So what he meant by that is that the monks in early Ireland who were working in a scriptorium transcribing the Latin Gospels by hand in beautiful ornate books, the most famous of which is the Book of Kells, housed in Trinity College, a world treasure. Sometimes they would say, as one of the great saints, Colum Kill, said, "Iski mo chrovon skriven," my hand is tired from writing. They would take a rest, look out, and maybe hear a blackbird. And suddenly, that was enough for them to write in the margin, and these poems are called marginalia, short little nature lyrics, very succinct, very clear, very terse, and very concentrated. And these have a resonance with haiku as well, in their brevity, in their intensity, in their nature-centeredness, and in the meditative cast of the mind of the monk anyway, which is, when I say meditative, that can mean two things: concentrating on the blackbird, its sound and its yellow beak, or the emptiness of the tired mind, the tired hand, and the nothingness, and that great vast void that the haiku can fill and celebrate. I've another Indian-inspired poem here that you might like to hear. I came across an Indian
No, after this question, we can start interaction with the audience. I would like to ask you one more thing, because I was just going through your translations of other poets. So I found this interesting that you have translated Gundar Grass, Rabindranath Tagore, and Seamus Heaney, K. Sachidanand, Hemant Diwate. It's a wide variety of, you have picked quite a number of varieties, and even I think Bhakti literature, you are interested in Bhakti literature. And so I just wonder, what is your focus of translating? Why do you choose these writers? How do you choose these writers? What is your scale?
You know, it's not necessarily poets that I might gravitate towards temperamentally or intellectually. Sometimes the poet who is your exact opposite in temperament and in experience, maybe even in politics, is the one you want to translate. The act of translation itself is the most intimate form of reading, in my experience, right? So, translating a poet, translating poems or songs, and by the way, I've translated literally hundreds of songs as well, singable versions of modern classics as well as lieder. And one of the reasons I enjoy doing this, and in fact I do some translation work every day, it's a form of yoga in a way, it's a form of meditation, it's a form of entering and being the other. Because I think the real act of translation is one of complete identification, yeah, with the subject matter, and with its rhythms, its colors, its fragrances, its thoughts, its emotions, and so on. And almost vampire-like, you feed off all these energies, and you hope that they strengthen you as well, and enrich your own emotional, intellectual, and cultural life in ways that may not surface today or tomorrow, but become part and parcel of your own personality then. So I'm interested in the whole notion of multiple personality as well. I'm not just one person. as Whitman says, I contradict myself, I contain multitudes. So the multitudes are also the songs and the poems and the plays that I've translated over the years. I can't personally distinguish between writing a poem myself and translating it. I can't distinguish. For me, it's the same creative source, and it's the same actually because I'm an Advaitist, I'm a non-dualist. I believe there's only one consciousness anyway. There is only the one, and we are tapping into that one, and we also are that one. I don't believe in distinct individual personalities at all. I believe that's part of the realm of Maya and illusion. So all these different voices from different epochs and from today, they're all the one in different guises.
Yeah, of course, translation is a meditative practice, and then another kind of creativity. So now I'd like to ask the audience whether you have any questions. Yeah.
I would like to request Gabriel to please read the poem you were going to, the Indian influenced poem that you were just going to read.
You would like me to read that poem I was about to read? Thank you, okay. I discovered a Bhakta from 19th century Orissa called Bhima Boy, and he inspired this poem. This is the translation in English. And again, it's one of these East-West poems. It's happening simultaneously in India and in Dublin, Ireland. Some say he was found like Moses. Others say, no, he was born here, or he was born there, here and there. Was he ever born? Did not he himself say his father is the beginningless Lord, his mother the primal energy from whose union he appeared, his tongue aflame with poetry? Some say he was born blind. Others say, no, he sees everything. How could a cow minder be blind? Maybe the cows were blind. No problem. His poetry is pure mantra. It can cure anything. Blindness, snakebite. In a cafe in Dublin, I found myself sitting opposite a man drinking a skinny latte. He looked vaguely familiar. Excuse me, I asked, are you Bhima Boy by any chance? How extraordinary, he replied. I was about to ask you the same question. I fled. Can one flee from him? On Grafton Street, a cow passed by. She paused for a while, listening to a busker chanting a bhajan. Form brighter than a million flames, limbs dazzling like a million suns. She rambled on down towards Trinity College, the light of the midday sun on her horns. Then I lost sight of her.
Is there any other question?
Ma'am, it's again a request to read the translation you did of his. You read in the starting. Could you read it without a break? Please. The poetry, the poem you were reading in the beginning, could you recite it again, please?
Dark days. in memory of Savita Halapanavar. Suspended at the end of Krishna Paksha, the moon is a sickle freeze-framed in the night sky. The fireworks have been cancelled, replaced by candles and a vision of you dancing on the cusp. These are dark days between Diwali and Advent, waiting for the moon to wax.
And you have written quite a number of animal poems. So yeah, would you like to read one of those? And what is your take on? Are you an animal lover? Yeah.
Okay, this is an elegy for a cat, which is not unusual for poets to write. My beloved cat, who I'd had for 15 years, died on my birthday last year. It's called Albus Bell. 49 and tilting towards a life defined by absences, not least of you, small friend, with whom I've spent more time than any other living thing. In these last few weeks, you lost a tooth, and then a weakness in the legs became pronounced, requiring help to stand or drink a little broth. On Tuesday last, you died here in the bed from which I write and look out on your grave, a sun-warmed spot I thought you'd like, curled up inside a wicker basket lined with fur and silk because so intimate a friend should have such things for comfort, and a little sprig of garden flowers to match your lilac coat, anemones, fritillaries, white cyclamen, small buds that bloomed the day you died, the solstice, and my birthday. No, I wrote an article recently about poets and animals, because when I look back at the collection, I was really surprised by the number of non-human creatures that are in there. It sort of feeds into my worldview, with a few divisions between humans and animals and everything else going on around us.
Would you like to read more? Yeah.
And so I'd like to read one called Bumblebees. I was at Vandana Shiva's talk yesterday, which I found absolutely wonderful. And also Noam Chomsky in his talk mentioned being an emotional pessimist and an emotional optimist and an intellectual pessimist. And I think that's the spirit in which this poem was written. Bumblebees. There was no need to fret about the bees. Their fragile nest unlidded as I pulled weeds beneath the apple tree, their squirming larvae naked to my gaze and to the sun. They watched me from the border while I hastily replaced the roof before returning to rethread the fibres of their grassy home. In the cleared weeds, I see their entrance and their exit, how their flight paths sweep the garden in an arc, stitching up the canvas of this space as if they could remake the world which lies in shreds around us. The dome moves as I watch it, the stretching of an inchoate form. When morning comes, it glistens with white dew.
And Ireland is the first country that legalized the gay marriages through popular vote. And I asked this question in connection with Leo Varadkar's. He has become the minister. So, what is your take in that change?
I thought it was an extraordinary thing for Ireland to step forward on the world stage in such a progressive way. It was the first election that one of my daughters got to vote in, and my second daughter will, I think her first election she'll be able to vote in is the repeal of the Eighth Amendment. So they're two really very significant things, and I think the whole nation was maybe surprised by the combined enthusiasm, and it was actually a very joyful campaign. And the night that the results were announced was the most moving experience. People weeping in the streets, a huge party around Dublin Castle, and it was a fabulous event. Yeah.
And I think we will wind up this session by both of these poets reading each poems once more. I'd like to read one more poem and then we'll wind up the session.
Okay, I'm going to read a Hustle of Exodus. I've been thinking a lot about the sea this week and how in Ireland everybody on the beach would be in the sea. And it represents something quite different, I think, where we are at the moment. And people have been talking about how the sea is used for trade or war, recreation. There's so many different purposes, but sadly one of the main purposes of the sea at the moment is for exile. This poem refers to that, a Hustle of Exodus. Cradled in a rush ark in the leaf-green Nile, Moses floats downstream, where parted reeds disclose him near to home. A Chilean coffee table can be donned and worn, saving time when on short notice to leave home. In 1947, SS Exodus set sail for Palestine, the closest it can get to home. Leaving Babylon behind, the Rastafarians turned their eyes to Ethiopia, their Zion home. Shark shoals follow coffin ships, feeding on the bodies of the dead, thrown overboard en route from home. Bibles open at Exodus, St. Kildan's bid farewell to their remote Atlantic island home. Millions of the displaced become convinced that an overladen boat is safer than their home. Silence in Calais jungle, where stitched up lips protest at bulldozed shanties, the makeshift substitute for home. Do we not hear alarm bells when this earth's people surge across the globe, flowing like the rain away from home?
Thank you for your kind attention. I'll finish today with a poem called The Last Postman. So I suppose this is an elegy for not just one person, a postman, but for a lot of people who are going to suffer at the hands of progress. You've gathered, I'm a bit of a Luddite, or to give it a more fancy term, an anarcho-primitivist. The Last Postman. The postman passes by on his bicycle, head stooped, wheezing, as though bearing the weight of the world, bills, eviction notices, summonses, the desperate, incoherent poetry of unrequited love, an emigrant's litany from distant shores. Rain clouds are stealing in from the west, as heavy as his load of sympathy letters, junk mail, final warnings from the bank, the taxman, electricity company, tearful flyers from charities, young boys with flies around their mouths and eyes, a personal note from the local representative Dear sir or madam, scratch cards, all this he must bear, and the knowledge that the age of letters is drawing to a close. And will he venture out some morning early, his satchel empty, the last postman?
Thank you, both of you, for being here. That was a really wonderful session, and thank you, audience, for being here.